I'm really a guy who lives out in the woods. Don't have any of those special fancy titles. But I am a father, and I want my children to live in a Christian nation. And I want my children to live in a Christian nation.
Welcome back, everyone. These videos that Steve and I are doing live stream are a combined effort between Lone Bulwark and Ars Politica. We're going to do them once every 2 weeks or so, twice a month. And it's a conversation between Stephen and I on various topics. We have subscribed content at lonebulwark.supercast.com. Check that out. You'll get Lone Bulwark early drop episodes ad-free. You'll get Ars Politica episodes, both the new content that we're doing, 2 series that we're doing right now, plus all the old content, or most of it. You'll also get the Scholar series that Stephen's doing, where he teaches classes. It's a really great value. Check it out, lonebulwark.supercast.com. This episode, Steve and I are going to be talking about a series of topics, some that have come up over the weeks that are important. We're going to be discussing sort of a casual conversation here. And the first topic that I want to ask Stephen is about reading the Venerable Dead. This is a tweet that you put out, actually, or a post, as they're called now, Stephen. And you said something about that we should read the Venerable Dead on the doctrine of God, justification, sanctification, basically theological topics. We should read the Venerable Dead. We should read John Calvin. We should read Charles Spurgeon. We should read whoever evangelicals are reading at the moment, important people, Augustine. But after we do that, we should then read them on other subjects as well. Many people don't know this. I didn't know this for a long time, even though I was in Christianity for a while. I had never heard that, for instance, some of these people had written on topics other than just theology. And I found this curious to myself. For instance, R.C. Sproul, he was a favorite of mine. He talked a lot about Martin Luther. Martin Luther on the doctrine of salvation, repentance, justification. And he would talk all about Luther all the time, but he never talked about Luther's other things that he wrote about. He wrote about marriage, for instance. He wrote about life generally, about raising children. He wrote about a number of subjects, some of which are no-no subjects, but some of them are politics addressed to the German nation or something like that. He gave some addresses. And at least from what I understand, from what I remember, Sproul never talked about that. I'm not faulting Sproul. Sproul is a theologian. He's a pastor. That's what he focused on. But you can exist inside of Christianity and never hear someone talk about what these theologians had to say about other subjects. Stephen, what are your comments here? That was your tweet, and it was, I think you actually pinned this one. What are you getting at when you say that we should read more than just theology and the Venerable Dead?
Yeah, what's interesting is that if you read someone like Calvin, in order to get, his political thought is notoriously difficult to decipher because he never wrote a political treatise, and so you kind of have to put it all together from his commentaries. And everyone, of course, goes to the very end of the Institutes, and they read that and they think they understand his politics, and that's basically, in terms of an extended discussion, all he said. And you take someone like Turretin, writes 3 volumes of theology and really dense material, and you find some commentary on political thought within the section on ecclesiology, and oftentimes that's where you'll find some of this stuff because the church relates to the state in some way, and so they talk about it there. But I think like more and more, like recently, people have uncovered and are republishing these works by Reformed thinkers, both theologians and jurists and political theorists, who are writing explicitly within the political discipline. And so stuff's coming out from people that were well known in their time, but not really well known today, like Bartholomew Keckerman, Daniel. There's other stuff you can find within that period. You also have Althusius, of course, who was not a theologian but a jurist by training. So you have all this body of political thought where people were writing within the political discipline. But I think we are in the Reformed world specifically so kind of caught up in the theology proper side of it, and that's what we read, that's what we buy. And so people, when they might see the scattered thoughts on politics, but they can't really put it together. And when they do, a lot of times it's just a statement. It's like it's just asserting something. It's not an extended argument. It's not dealing into the actual discipline. But so my point was in that tweet was that as we do this retrieval, as we bring back the writings of the Reformed tradition, let's look at these works and take them seriously, because they're works of political theory. I mean, there are aspects in which they assume their own time, so their own political structures that they're commenting on, the ways that civil rulers would be also military leaders and other things that would not fit perfectly within our own world. But they were still doing political theory. That is, they're answering perennial questions of politics. And so I think we should take them seriously. I think the other reason is that you have, like whenever you read a political work today, almost always it carries with it really like heavily, either explicitly or implicitly, very modern assumptions. Egalitarian assumptions, the almost like sanctity of liberalism, like some form of liberalism is the only way. And we bring in the categories of modern political forms, so that if you don't affirm some version of liberalism, then you must be a fascist, or you're a socialist, you're communist, because that's our imaginations constrained by these very modern categories. And so when you dive into these older works who were not operating under those categories, under basically the political regime types codified by Aristotle and Plato, Polybius, and that's how they thought about politics. And they didn't have these other categories that they were trying to avoid. I mean, nowadays, literally, if I said the exact thing something Calvin would say, they'd call me a fascist, which is completely anachronistic. Anyway, that's another thing. Like, it's worth reading these guys, because you're entering into our world, but it's also a world in which it doesn't have these modern assumptions. It doesn't have to qualify things to secure your status as a good liberal. But so much of and also that they thought of politics. This is a big thing too. I keep going on, but like this will be the last thing. They thought of politics, as in political politics is the art of ordering society rightly, to the end that for the good of the community. And that was it. That was the definition of politics. And that shaped the way they talked about it. But in modern times, Christians think of politics in terms of witness, as in somehow like the end of it, the purpose of us doing politics is an apologetic. It's apologetics. And
when did that change, do you think? Like, do you know when that happened, when the change occurred? Because at one point it wasn't that, and now it's become something else.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly, when that changed, I think that was, I think in the Reformed world, at least, that significantly changed with the late 90s, early 2000s, with the rise of Tim Keller and the Gospel Coalition, and their form of rhetoric that they've adopted. It basically that you started using the language of moral witness, of political witness, and everything became. And I think this is true. You see some of this among like theonomists and presuppositionalists, and so maybe it's older. I don't know, but this tendency to reduce everything to apologetics and not keeping things within their own domains. And so the point is, you go back to these older guys. And these older guys don't have that hang up. They know that politics is for the rightful ordering of society for the good of the community. And that good of the community is according to nature, that is natural law or the law of God. And so that's why, and that's one of the, like, it's a modern assumption we bring into our political thought, and I've said, we've said many times that like when we say moral witness, what we mean is we're trying to appeal basically to the center left. So this means that the entire way that we do rhetoric, orient ourselves in political life, is to appeal to coastal elites, aspiring coastal elites. And so you read the older guys, and they get away from that, or not get away. They have no concept of that. They have actually a proper understanding of politics. So anyway, that's
When
what I think.
as you were talking, I was thinking perhaps sometime in the early liberal era, where Christians began to consider, or just Westerners began to conceive of government as fixing society. Like government's going to actually take over education, and through education, we're going to purify society of crime, ignorance, disease, poverty, and so on. Maybe that could have some kind of influence. But my second thought was there could have been some influence from the statist period. So that developed into, I don't want to say that directly led to, but that the movement of history led to the state taking over all these free associations that Alexis de Tocqueville talked about, to there being no free associations. It's just the state. And then you have statism and the response to statism. So statism in the 1900s was this ideology that the state, there's all within the state, nothing without the state. This was it wasn't just communism, fascism, or Nazism or something. This was happening here in America too. The state is going to take over everything. And in response to that, you have people saying things like, no, it's not the state that holds our highest allegiance. It's the church or something else that we have other allegiances. And often, not always, but often these apologists for different things attacking statism would kind of talk in a totalitarian language themselves about whatever it is that's supposed to replace the state. For instance, the church. Or I remember reading libertarians like Mises, and I noted he's writing in a certain context, a certain era, but his language is often the same sort of totalizing language, just for the free markets as opposed to the state. But the free market is total. It's everything. It's all encompassing. Everything within the free market, nothing without the free market. And I'm not against everything Mises said here. I'm just pointing out there was a reaction to statism that itself was totalitarian in the sense of all encompassing, not in the sense of being tyrannical. And so maybe that could have been an influence too, where we now look at politics as like it's now a facet under the state or under the church, as opposed to being its own sphere, the idea of sphere sovereignty or subsidiary or layers of gradations of social orders and institutions. So what you're saying, Stephen, is that once upon a time, Christians, Reformed people, thought and said that the state had a role, politics had a role, and it was, in one sense, it was limited, and it had a definition. Whereas today, it's used for, at least among evangelical Christians, it's used as a springboard for evangelism, and that's really its only purpose. Supposedly, it's not to do all kinds of other things that people have always used it for. It's just for the purposes of evangelism. Yeah. Is that what you're kind of getting at?
Yeah. I mean, I also want to say, like, yeah, so the state has been with its army of bureaucrats. So I think when you think of the modern state, you have to think in terms of managerialism, the expert class, who, the old Wilsonian concept where, okay, we're still going to have politics, but actually the administrators of the state are going to make the decisions. And so the post-managerialism, you get a society where people are shouting and talking, but don't have an impact, because in the end, it's the state through its administration, its totalizing administration that actually makes the decisions. So I think there's element. I think also like liberalism itself, combined with that manager, has made it where we have this public square where you have different voices, which is this cacophony of shouting at each other with various ideas. And it's not clear what we're even up to, if we're trying to convince or persuade, or if we're going to win. And if we win, so what? And I think that these guys have basically, they've assumed that we have this kind of arena of contestation, but Christians are not really to win in the public sphere, but they're just supposed to contest. And so if that's all you are doing is just have this, like, we're participating in the discussion, but you can't ever actually achieve anything in substance apart from maybe a few policy things, then why not just engineer a political thought that is winsome, that looks nice, that sounds nice to your target audience? And that's what I think you find in someone like Jonathan Leeman, who talks about the political church, where Christians learn politics in the church, not merely from the pulpit, but from their being in the church. Their membership of the church is a sort of heavenly politics as an outpost of heaven. You learn this heavenly politics, and then you go out into the world with that politics, which doesn't appear to be practical or about actually using or gaining power or winning. It's just presenting a sort of beautiful heavenly politics as again, a matter of apologetics. So everything's kind of been reduced, like you said, to evangelism in a way. And yeah, and I think that's a combination of managerial statism with liberalism. And it actually symbolized, I think, a sort of powerlessness for the average person to make any sort of impact in politics. Like we just talk, or we discuss, or we shout. But in the end, it's the bureaucrats and the billionaires that are going to make the decision for us through technocrats. So
I think I'm understanding
I
a
think
little
that's
bit here. As you talk, I'm coming to an understanding of why it is. And I'm sure you just said this, but in my own mind, I have my way of understanding why it is that the evangelical, let's say the middle moderate people, the mass, appeal to the left in their politics. It's because they use politics as an evangelistic tool, and the people that are in charge of politics, the people that are in power, generally are liberals.
Yeah.
Whether they're a little bit more conservative liberals or radical left liberals or something, they're liberals. They're classical liberals, whatever. And so if evangelicalism is using politics as evangelism, and politics is mostly filled with liberals in power, you're going to be using politics in a liberal way, in a liberal language. You're going to be leaning in a leftward direction, so to speak.
Yeah,
Not
it's
in a rightward
going
direction.
to be liberal coded, is one way to say it, right?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a simpler, that's the Zoomer way, liberal coded. But what's interesting, though, is this not true, though, that let's say, like, you know how conservatives love to say, what if the roles were reversed? What if it was the right that was in political power? Do you think that evangelicals would be using politics to evangelize the right? I don't. I'd like to say that they would, because they would be consistent, but we don't actually see that. There's never an evangelism
Right.
towards the right politically. It's actually the only time people who use politics for the actual purpose of punishing the good or punishing the evil and rewarding the good is when they, in their minds, are using it towards the right, not towards the left. So they actually do have a politics proper. It's just in one direction.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's not merely it's not simply that they are doing politics as evangelism. I think that's like pretty clearly the case. I mean, they say that if in not those words, but other words. But at the same time, they are themselves, I would say, by instinct, they are naturally center left or left wing. But they also have an intellectual commitment to theological orthodoxy. So they'll right. So this is usually how I try to understand some people who seriously disagree with me, who are more left wing than me, but still would check all the dots on the right orthodox doctrines. That in the end they affirm the doctrines, but their type of, you could say, instinct or their second nature by nature is actually more left wing, and so they are more oriented to that crowd. It's not purely pragmatism. I do think they have a certain affinity to people to their left, and they have a kind of a disdain for people to their right, and that's not simply performative. I think there is an element to that, but I think they truly do have this kind of visceral reaction to people on the right that they would not have with the left. So some guy that they would praise someone who is pro-abortion or pro-gay, pro-LGBT stuff, for saying the right thing. But they wouldn't dare do that for someone on the right who says something they agree with. They wouldn't want to affirm that person in his ability. So yeah, there absolutely is like that. I think there is a natural affinity they have for those people.
I just saw this on social media earlier this morning, where a certain pastor apparently was off Twitter for a while, and he came back saying, "Hello, everyone."
Yeah.
And there's a prominent atheist who came and said, "Hey, welcome back." And then this pastor said, "Thanks, friend." And they had a little jovial banter between them
Yeah.
in that. And I thought, here's a man who violates the first table, right?
Yeah.
The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. The Bible says this is the greatest commandment, is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And that's the greatest commandment, and therefore it's the greatest sin. And Christians throughout history, even early liberals, would say that such people are they're dangerous. They're not to be trusted if their mind cannot conceive of God. This is a dangerous place to be. Anyway, but this is accepted among Christians, among this crowd. But if you were to do a post-war sin, for instance, or if you were to commit a rightward political, thought, wrong thought, or crime thought, or whatever it's called, you would be completely attacked, and through the political process as well. If they were able to wield politics to their liking, they would use it. But to their left, they don't. In fact, they admit all kinds of sin on the left, or at least in the liberal direction. Okay,
Yeah.
so in one sense, you're right, Stephen. Evangelicals look at politics as a way for evangelism, but it's only in one direction. In the other direction, they very much use politics as a tool of power against their enemy. And this happens. They're very free about it. They're very open. They encourage themselves to do this. And then we don't have to explore all the reasons why. I actually want to ask you a different question here. It's about liberals.
Well, let
So
me
we've been
just
talking
say
about.
one
Okay,
quick thing about this
go
is
ahead.
that, like, in the case of James Lindsay, I mean, we're talking about Owen Strachan. I'll just mention him. So he wouldn't dare call James Lindsay a God hater,
Hmm.
on social media. But if someone doesn't particularly agree with, let's say, Israel's, like, whether or not it was just for Israel to level Gaza,
Hmm.
which I think is a legitimate view, whether it was according to just war. Once we can debate it. It seems that you see the images, it's like, okay, well, a question should arise.
Hmm.
Whether or not it was just is a different, is a debatable thing. But anyway, he would, someone who does think it was unjust, who just simply says it was unjust, he would certainly call that person a Jew hater for having a
Right.
disagreement over an action regarding just war. And that person could actually agree with him on all the essential doctrines. I mean, they maybe
Right.
not in the Trinity, but anyway, there is that, like, there's that obvious difference where a guy violates, like, the highest of God's law, which is to honor and worship God, and
Hmm.
literally at the
Hmm.
point of not acknowledging existence, and also
Right.
all these other things, degenerate things that Lindsay has advocated for. But yeah, he's a co-belligerent. It's really kind of it's strange, and it goes to the word, like, mind virus is, like, overused, but that is kind of what it is. Like, there is this, yeah, they have an affinity for people to their left, but not for the right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, we can explore this all day, but I wanted to get to another topic, which is the idea of the
Yeah.
post-liberal individual, someone who is beyond liberalism, supposedly. I'm not sure what that means. You actually had
Yeah.
a post about this back in 2018 or something that it was on Facebook. It was quite lengthy. I think it was satirical. You were kind of making fun. I'm not going to rehash it now, but can you explain what the post-liberal is? I don't hear that phrase much, but apparently there are people who call themselves post-liberals, and they kind of act, from what I understand, as though they're beyond liberalism, and it's something that we've moved beyond, but they're not going back to being conservatives. They're certainly not rightists. They're not trad people. And I
Yeah.
guess maybe your point in that post was they're not really post-liberal. They're actually just liberal. I mean, maybe I'm putting words in
They're
your mouth.
just social democrats.
Okay.
Yeah, that post goes back to 2018, where I was making fun of post-liberalism. That
Okay.
in that time, that's when people were using post-liberalism a lot more, and
Okay.
you see it's probably exemplified in a not well-known magazine called Plow. And you all, and some of the Roman Catholic integralists called them that. I think Deneen has called himself post-liberal.
Okay.
But in the end, it's just a way to avoid the fact that they're just social democrats. They're basically Sweden, Norway, Nordic country type
Okay.
socialists,
Okay.
which isn't properly speaking socialist, but that there is that they're more pro, redistribution than other places. And I
Okay.
was just kind of poking fun because it's in the end, post-liberalism is just welfare liberalism. It affirms egalitarianism. It has no sense of people in place. They're okay with nearly unlimited immigration. It's a type of moralizing. It's moralizing politics. It's heavily moralized politics where you can, take shots at capitalism and free markets and
Okay.
and deny that you're a liberal. But I think it's kind of waned a little bit, except I believe that James Wood still calls him that, even though he's just a liberal. I mean, politically, he's a liberal. And I don't know. They're trying to find label. I usually don't like saying like post this or that unless it's chronological. We say post-war consensus because it's after the war. But after an ideology, why don't you just come up with a different name? Call it what it is.
Okay.
Call it welfare liberalism or something like that. But yeah, I mean, other people like James K. Smith were also part of that.
The Anglican guy, is that the guy who wrote some Anglican books?
I don't think he's
Anglican
Anglican. I
Way?
think he's actually like a charismatic Baptist. I don't think he's at Calvin University.
Oh, really? Okay,
Yeah,
maybe I've mixed up with someone else.
yeah. Oh, that's you're thinking about Milbank. I think Milbank. I think
Okay.
actually he just called himself a socialist. Like I think he's close to communism.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't think it's a big factor now. It's a dumb label. I think everyone can easily kind of see through it.
Okay.
But
Are there other
still are
groups
people.
trying to get past liberalism? Like they don't wear the label, they have some other label that they call themselves, but they're essentially still living within the liberal, classical liberal, whatever framework. Are there any other groups? Post-liberal seems a little bit too obvious, but are there others that don't use that label, might use another label?
I would say like us, like the Christian New Right is anti-modern liberalism because I don't want to, because I think the 19th century America was a form of liberalism. You can call it classical. That kind of distorts it. There was just there's a type of ordered liberty that was made possible by the people and the institutions of America in that century. So I do think we kind of question a lot of modern liberalism. And usually when I
Okay.
say liberalism, that's kind of what I mean, is a form of modern egalitarian liberalism. So yeah, yeah. But that's why we get a lot of pushback. Like people assume that that modern liberalism is liberalism, and that's the norm. And then when we start questioning some of its kind of its foundations, then we get attacked a lot.
Yeah.
But I would love to return to the ordered liberty of 1820 or 18 like that sort of thing.
Sure.
But anyway, yeah.
Yeah. So in liberalism, there's this ideology of the universal man.
Hmm.
Cosmopolitanism, globalism is what we call it today. But the idea of the universal man, I've heard scholars talk about this, where it's a characteristically European trait to conceive of all of humanity from our from our perspective, let's say. And this is something I've heard in people like in like proto form in Hegel, for instance. He didn't say this exactly, but he made some comments about how his ideology, his philosophy was challenged by the existence of Africans in Africa. Like his whole world
Hmm.
development thing, his scheme works in a European context, not necessarily an African context. But along the way, there's been a lot of liberals who conceive of all of humanity as though everyone's just like us. And someone recently commented to this extent that there's this quest for a universal common principle that unites all people. And this idea, he said, is a uniquely European project. And it leads us to say strange things like this. I think it was leader of the UN. I can't remember her name, but it's something Dutch. And she had really poofy hair. That's all I remember. And she said something like, Islam is part, or excuse me, European values are founded upon the Talmud, or Islam is part of our cherished values. So it's no longer, we used to be a Christian people, then we became a Judeo-Christian people, and now we're a Judeo-Islamo-Christian people. And I think that this extension of things, at least, I mean, Judeo-Christian, you can kind of make sense of that, yeah, like the Old Testament, then the New Testament, and all this. But Islam, that's I'm not arguing for Judeo-Christian either. I'm just saying, like Islam, it's like that's pretty extreme and glaring. But the idea is that this universal quest, this universal man, these universal common principles lead us to say things like that, and it's embedded in the liberal mind. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think the modern West has made itself so that the someone belongs here simply if they're human and they carry some citizenship paperwork. So in other words, like the foundation of belonging and being one of us, or being, whatever us is, whether it's France or Germany or England or the United States, is that you're just simply a human. So that's the fundamental principle of all society. And I think that's because of the West for a long time had a very universal conception of man, particularly like the Middle Ages. You get a development of natural law. You see it in the late Renaissance, early modern. Everyone's talking about natural law. Natural law is universal. It applies to every single person. And there was a sort of crisis of natural law when the West Indies, the New World was discovered, and also treks into Africa. And because there was an expectation, like according to the theories of natural law, if there were peoples in the New World, you would expect to see some degree of, civilization, some kind of development,
right.
some set of gods. Like there would be a recognition of divinity of some sort. But you didn't find that. You saw things radically different than what you read in the classical literature, and of course in your own literature. It was radically different. So it was a kind of a crisis of natural law. And there's a book by a guy from Geneva, actually commissioned by Calvin, to go as a missionary to Brazil. And when he came back to Geneva, he wrote a book. I forget its name, but it's a fascinating book where he describes his sort of bewilderment, because he was a well-educated man, and he was expecting some form of civilization, recognition of natural law, this sort of thing, and there was nothing like that. People were naked all over the place. Like it was just bizarre to them. Anyway, the point is, the West for a long time had a conception of the natural law that I think was subverted into human rights. So now it goes from natural law to human rights, which actually are in a way more expansive, and actually removed what the natural law is something binding as law. But we have a very universal mindset. Like we have the mind of a universal man, and that's come to shape our conception of what a nation is. But that's, like you said, that's like uniquely Western. You go anywhere else in the world, and not even like, you could just go to Eastern Europe and see this. There's a clear understanding of that, the idea, the humanity principle, that the commonness of man is affirmed, and yet it's not significant. The most significant is actually your people group. People identify as a people group, oftentimes as opposed to other people groups, and don't impose, as we do, a really substantive conception of the human upon those relationships. But because we've done that, and this, I think, goes back to, like, again, millennia, we start to conceive of nations as simply a place for humans to produce, consume, and our institutions are, in a way, can promote that. Capitalism or free markets, where we're just consumers and producers. In the end, we're all interchangeable humans. So it doesn't matter where you're from. If you work hard, then you belong to us.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
And after years of empirical experience of this, and it mostly being manifestly not the case, why don't people recognize that? Why don't people say, hey, we are different? And so, for instance, people say diversity is our strength. They'll talk about diversity, multiculturalism. But in reality, these are not multicultural cultures. We're not actually celebrating being diverse. We're actually all the same. They're wanting us to be all the same, right? They're trying to homogenize us
Hmm.
and calling it diversity when actual diversity would be we remain distinct, and we continue being distinct and distinct people. This is something that goes back as far as Plato and many philosophers in history, political philosophers would say you begin your political philosophy with the nature of man, with anthropology, and there's always this attempt to universalize the nature of man. Man is rational; he's a rational animal, and so on and so forth. And as you said, when we started going about in the world, encountering different peoples, that assumption that man is rational and rational in the same way, always doing the same things, that was actually challenged. And by many philosophers in the modern period have had to reckon with this. And many, however, just ignore it. But we have differences. And one of the things Plato said in his Republic, for instance, I'm just going back to the very beginning of Western philosophy. He said, people are like trees or something. Oaks grow out of acorns, and orange trees grow in a certain climate, and so on and so forth. And if you were to, he didn't say this part, but if you were to transplant any one of these, it would wither in a different climate, a different longitude, or excuse me, latitude, or whatever it is. And so, and he said, humans are like that. Out of humans arise certain types of governments according to their character. And with that character of the people, you need certain types of laws that may be different than the laws over here for different people. And so long ago, people were able to understand that humans are different and we need different conditions to flourish best in. And then at some point along the way, though, we began to believe that there's this universal man, almost like a form, Plato's forms. And we all are that form deep down. And if we could just tap into that form of law, that form of social condition, we can find one social condition, one law that would work for everybody. And we in the West, whether rightly or wrongly, arrogantly or rightfully, again, we think that we've found it. We think that we've found the way, the right way. There's no other way that things can work. Our way is the correct way. Our philosophy is the correct philosophy. And our way of doing things is the right way and everybody can adjust into it. Everyone. And I think some of the challenges that we face today are mass immigration. And after many, many years, some people have been in the West from the non-West for hundreds of years. And some have assimilated, some have not. And some, not only are they not assimilating, they're actually furthering away, they're breaking away. And the extent of this project has some limits, and it's not a universal project. So I'm curious, Stephen, why do you think people who don't recognize it, why do you think are they blinded by their ideology? Is it political? Do they want to keep their jobs? Not say something politically incorrect? Because these ideas are ruining the West. They're absolutely destroying the West. Are people just trying to save their own skin while the whole ship sinks?
I think there's part of that, but I also think it's just deeply ingrained in people's minds. Again, I think that I think it's a subversion of what made the West great. So the reason why the West is the place of technological advancement in philosophy, logic, just civilization, the sort of things we all, and now the whole world enjoys, is due to that very universalistic mindset that was in the West. And it worked in terms of a stabilizing civilization because there wasn't mass immigration. But now I think, but there were, even in our own history, there are clear moments when a significant portion of the population recognized that what we have is actually very particular. The founding period itself, the founders were very much against immigration for precisely these reasons, that the people who came there would not readily adopt the universal principles that produce ordered liberty.
Wait, the founders were against immigration? They weren't tolerant and diverse?
Yeah.
I thought this was American tradition. All
Yeah,
men are equal.
they weren't consistent. We need to we need to unfold the American principles into just
Oh,
massive
okay.
unlimited
They didn't
immigration.
realize. They
But
didn't realize. Yeah. Okay, I get it.
but yeah, but they said, yeah, we have universal ideas of natural liberty and natural rights, and yet not every people in the world is prepared to adopt all of those. And so they were very hesitant with particularly Roman Catholic immigrants because they thought they're under the tyranny of the Pope and therefore they're not
Mm.
suitable for a self-government and natural kind of ordered liberty. And so they recognize that. And then you get waves of immigration in the 19th century. You have the Know Nothing movement, and then the sort of Anglo-Saxonist movement that occurred in the early 20th century that led to the, I believe it was 1924 Immigration Act. Sometimes I say 25,
Hold
but I
on.
think it was
What was the
24.
Anglo-Saxon movement? What are you referring to? What is that?
Yeah, there was a. I mean, this is true throughout our history. We've forgotten it. There was a recognition of Anglo-Saxonism going even back to the founders. So
Mm.
you have that there is even a sort of myth, a myth that was actually widely held, that the people who originally settled the New World from the British Isles was they were like the Saxons of old, who were now fleeing from the Norman conquest. Like and they
Mm.
originate from
Wow.
Germany, in which that's where they learned liberty to their bones. And
Yeah.
so there was that myth that some people would say, I don't know to what degree they believed it, but at least it was a sort of animating myth that we are
Okay.
unique because our people come from the German forest in which a type of liberty thrived, that sort of thing. But then
Yeah.
you get like more developed versions of it that you see among, take Henry Adams. Henry Adams was he was actually, I don't know if he started, I think he started the Anglo-Saxonist department at Harvard.
Really?
Yeah, so
Wow.
there even was a
Okay.
study of this, and there was a explicit recognition
Hmm.
that our liberties that we enjoyed as Americans were rooted in like basically an Anglo tradition,
Okay.
and so that
Henry
had to be
Adams.
preserved.
Okay.
And this contributed to that 1924 Immigration Act, which restricted immigration across the board. I think that we'd still allow Europeans, but it was a recognition of the same theme. And then, of course, and that was the law of the land until 1965. And of course, we get the
Mm.
results of it we're in today. But yeah,
Okay.
I think people are like psychologically ingrained with this stuff, and they're unable to get out of it. And the other thing too, I keep going on, but like I think what marked the West was the development of what you can call like a type of altruistic reciprocity. Now that's a fancy way of saying something, but
Okay.
altruistic
So
reciprocity.
for us dumb people, like
Yeah,
I only have an MDiv. So can you explain
yeah,
altruistic?
altruistic reciprocity. What this means then is that in your dealings with people and society, there's general goodwill.
Okay.
You're not motivated by like there are friendships of utility, um, but there's something more than that. There's a type of goodwill in, okay, we have developed, like we have a general goodwill for each other. Now, of course, there's people are going to laugh at that and say, well, that's not true, but compared to other places, it is true. You go to
Right.
most places in the world,
Right.
and bribery and fraud is literally a way of life. Like it's literally
Right.
accepted as a way of life, whereas for us, it is not. And there's
Mm.
just kind of a general, we're not, we don't, we're not exploitative of people. And so anyway, I think so because of that like altruistic reciprocity, like a general goodwill, you then take us into our modern condition that's easily exploited. Like, why aren't we being reciprocal? Why aren't we reciprocating, or why aren't we having this sort of altruism towards the people who from the world around us? They're suffering. Their
Yeah. Yeah.
conditions are
Yeah.
horrible. Why don't we bring them over here? After all, it's universal humanity. So I think that's one of the main things going on.
Okay.
Again, like subversion, we're being our own, the things that made us great are being exploited to destroy us. That's what's happening.
And it's not necessarily this black boot subversion where in 1984 the party, whoever it was, told Winston to imagine the future as a boot stomping on a human face forever. It's not hard like that. It's a sort of soft subversion. And there was something else that I saw on social media recently. It's that if Satan wanted to subvert moral foundations of the West, which he does, he wouldn't disguise himself as a fascist today, but as a nice liberal. He would disguise himself as someone who really cares, who has a lot of warm feelings and is open and tolerant. We're often told you need to watch out for the right. That's where the danger comes. The greatest threat to America today, people say, is stuff going in that direction. But it's easy to spot. It's very easy to spot. I'm reading. I read a lot of Tolkien. Maybe I mention him a lot, but I'm not going to apologize for that. You should read a lot of Tolkien. But it's interesting to me. I'll quickly. Sorry. There's two great evil people in the Tolkien universe. There's Morgoth, who's like one of the angel gods, and then there's Sauron, who is like his servant. But Morgoth eventually gets defeated, and Sauron's the main character in the Second Age and the Third Age when he's defeated in Lord of the Rings. But what's interesting is that the first bad guy for Tolkien, Morgoth, he's kind of like the fascist dictator that you would imagine. He's the black boot stomping on everyone. He's bold. He declares his intentions. He wants to enslave you and destroy the world, everything. But Sauron is subtle. Now, he does reveal himself at times and fight openly, but whenever he's defeated, he changes his position and becomes a voice of reason and compassion. And he comes to the elves and says, "You care for Middle-earth as do I. Why should we not work together to improve and beautify this just as the Valar do in their paradise, which they never share with us? Who knows why they withhold the good gifts from us, but we should have them for ourselves." And he gets into your mind and he starts to manipulate people. And the whole story of Lord of the Rings is Sauron manipulating the will of people. He doesn't come to you with external coercion, although sometimes he does, but his real power is in manipulation and subversion and trickery. He tricks all the Numenorians. It's like these high men who go live in an island west of Middle-earth. They go live there for a while and it's beautiful and perfect. And then eventually it's overthrown because Sauron comes over, and they knew he was an enemy, but he comes over with sweet words and winning rhetoric. And in other words, it's more of like a soft power at first. And that's more dangerous. Morgoth was defeated. It's clear he's evil. Sauron, he couldn't be so easily defeated because it was more of this, he was like not a nice liberal, but he came with a smiley face, so to speak. Stephen, do you have any thoughts about this? I think you actually put out a tweet about this, the satanic subversion of morals.
Yeah, I think it's ridiculous that we're constantly looking for the Marxist or the fascist.
Yeah.
Always looking for the Marxist. And if we don't agree with that person, that a Marxist or a fascist or a communist or whatever.
Mm.
But if you just survey the things that you are protecting your children from, that you protect yourself from, and then look who's behind that, and they're just liberals. They're modern liberals. Call them left liberals, whatever you want to call them. Maybe secretly deep down they're communists, but that's not what they're saying they are, and they're not acting like communists. Communists are the ones who, try to fight you on the street, or they agitate for revolution, or they,
Right.
or they try to go for like labor strikes and do like that. That's what a communist does. But liberals are making content and you're consuming it, or you're protecting yourself and your kids from that. They're just liberals. Like, we should just recognize that if like, who's subverting, who's putting trash, who's trying to entice people? Liberals. And by liberals, I don't mean, I don't mean like, I don't mean like liberals as in the left. I think there's trash on the conservative side too that is basically liberalism, but it's the ideology of liberalism, and so we should question that and not seek to like, oh, this guy, like people call me like because a socialist or fascist, whatever. It's like, no, but like we shouldn't do the same thing. It's to reduce everyone to a scary communist. Yeah, it is in the end. It's that, at least on the surface, that nice liberal who just wants to care for the trans child, or it's the nice liberal who wants that boy to feel like he thinks he should have been, which is a girl, and then he can race against the girls in the track field. Right? It's that. It's like, so we should stop thinking that's just like communists. It's just, yeah.
Well, so there's a man named Joe Rigney. I think Joe Rigney, he's a pastor in somewhere, and I think he's a professor maybe too, but he wrote a few books, I believe, about, one of them's called The Sin of Empathy. And I have not read the book, but I remember hearing this the first time, and my first thought was, empathy is not a sin in the Bible. Right? How are you saying that? Of course, I haven't read the book. I'm not criticizing the book. That was just my thought. Okay. But I could see how it can become something not good. At least it can be used wrong. Like every virtue can become a vice, right? Or I don't know if empathy is a virtue or not, but I'm just saying compassion can actually do harm. Stephen, you and I are reading Cicero right now, his own obligations, on Ars Politica podcast. Subscribe, Supercast. But we're reading that right now, and he talks about different virtues and how they can be, they're all necessary, they're all good, but some can conflict sometimes. And actually enacting one at the improper time is not virtuous. It can actually lead to something that's harmful to the recipient, or to the person doing it, or to others unintended. And you have to weigh these things. And so with empathy, like the liberal, it's really difficult when they say love is love. We just want to love each other. We just want to accept each other. Just let me be me. How could you say no to that? It's extremely difficult to come up with some kind of argument against that. Admittedly, they have the rhetorical weight behind them when they say that, and that's the liberal position. But I think this idea that Satan, he dresses himself up as an angel of light. He doesn't come to you with forked tail and horns and a pitchfork or something, and he's red. Judas Iscariot, when Jesus said, "One of you are going to betray me tonight," the whole team there didn't look at Judas and like, "Yeah, we know." They were like, "Who is it going to be? We have no idea."
Yeah.
And I think this is something that all good-minded, good-hearted people need to understand. It's kind of like when you go to, let's say, a defense class, like martial arts or using a firearm or something. One of the things that the instructors will usually say to you is, you need to try to think like a criminal a little bit, because it's not natural to us to think like a criminal. It's not natural to good-hearted people. How could I exploit me if I were a criminal in this situation? How would I rob me? How would I be harmed? You don't think like that. We're naturally good-hearted people. And so the same thing here. There are people who come off as nice. They're just really, really nice. And it doesn't seem like it's going to harm anything. I think, however, we're at an advantage at this point in history because we've had liberalism around for maybe a couple hundred years at this point, and we've seen its fruit. We've seen the dangers. We've seen the harm that it can create, that it does create. And we need to have a real politic, an empirical observation, or at least a theory that involves empirical observation for what is real and what happens. Not what ought to happen, not what my interpretation of things says should happen, but what actually happens when we have too much of this virtue, or too little of that virtue, or too much of this virtue over here, but not over here. And this is, I think, I haven't read the book, The Sin of Empathy, but I totally see this is everything from like family court stuff and to immigration law, to welfare, to education and how we educate people today. And we don't want to discipline the kids too hard because that's their culture to not study. It's their culture not to be disciplined. And so we're not going to push them. And in fact, Thomas Sowell, a guy whose mind is an amazing thinker, I've learned a lot from him. I think he has a book on his autobiography, uh, maybe just a biography, where he talks about his youth. He's the first person in his family to have gone to a certain level of education, at least to college, maybe beyond. He got his PhD, obviously, but on his family. Anyway, he said it was his teachers when he was young who did not have compassion on him because he was from a disadvantaged background. They didn't show any favoritism to him and say, "Oh, well, we'll let him misspell words because that's his culture." I mean, how patronizing is that, right? And he said if they would have done that to him, he never would have been pushed to develop his mind to the degree that he did. So there's so many people who are actually being harmed, right? They're not being pushed to their full potential because we lower the standards for them. You can see this in the military as well. You can see this all over when people get hired to CEO levels or board levels for institutions, not because of their merit, and they get PhDs because of this as well. They get invited to PhD programs. We have people in charge of lots of things in America and in the West, and we're seeing the negative effects of it. I think we're in a good position to see the negative effects of it, and we need to be honest with ourselves, not forget compassion, which is a good thing, but to remember we can't, as the saying goes, rob Peter to pay Paul, or to feed Paul, or to house Paul, or to educate Paul. We need to be shrewd about how we enact our obligations and duties.
Yeah, I totally agree. I haven't read the book either, Rigney's book. But yeah, I mean, I think people are debating about like, well, you know, the word could be good. You're just talking about how it could be used for bad. But yeah, but I think he says that toxic empathy has the appearance of caring, but it's actually extremely harmful for the reasons that you mentioned. And but I think you can combine with that so you're required to be empathetic towards favored groups and not other groups. And the groups that you're not required to be empathetic towards, you can openly express what is perceived as righteous indignation. Right. Mm-hmm. So you can, I mean, you know, this goes, we've probably said it, you know, too many times, but like you be empathetic towards like that white kid who was stabbed in the heart by the black kid recently. Right. You see an explosion of empathy. It's like, oh, he's only 17. And and he told the white kid not to touch him, and then he touched him, and then it was self-defense. And like that's just clear like empathy. But let's say that the white guy, if it was a white guy that did it, there would be riots in the street, there'd be righteous indignation, we'd be called racist. I mean, you know, of course, it's like imagine what it would be if the roles were reversed, right? But so yeah, but I think for a lot, this is the thing though, it's we talked about this years ago. It's called perfect injustice. And this is something Plato mentions in the Republic. And I think it's a really profound point, even though it's not actually Socrates who says it. I think it's like Thrasymachus, I think, says it. But whatever. Good job. Good job. But it's a good point. Perfect injustice. And that is the idea. Perfect injustice is not you being openly as unjust as possible. That is, it's not you being evil for everyone to see. That's actually imperfect injustice. But the perfect injustice is that you are as evil as you possibly can be, and yet it's wrapped in the appearance of virtue. Right. It's like it's mixed with extreme hypocrisy, and I think that really defines our ruling class. I mean, Trump seems to be tearing that down, but at least for the last, literally, even under George W. Bush, with so-called compassionate conservatism, there was perfect injustice. That is, it's deep. In substance, it is unjust, it's harmful, it's destructive, and yet it's wrapped in all this sort of beautiful garb, sometimes theological language of helping the marginalized and this and that.
So what you're saying
Um,
is Plato would argue that Sauron was more evil than Morgoth.
yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Sorry,
I
I'm
mean,
just
you
nerding
know
out.
all that. No, you're right. But I mean, you know all that better than I do. But yeah, I think that's, yeah.
Hmm.
It's certainly easier. This is the problem, and that's why it's very effective in our conditions. It's easy
Yeah.
to manipulate people with empathy and just love everyone, be kind, when actually it's just pure aggression
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
harm.
Okay. Well, hey, I
Yeah.
think maybe we have time for one more topic here. I think we're at an hour or almost an hour. Um, there was a recent discussion among some Christian leaders about Christian nationalism. So just kind of changing the
Yeah.
topic here. Christian nationalism. Some people have talked about, have criticized it from kind of within the camp, or at least adjacent to the camp. So these are not antagonistic people, but people right near, and they're saying, "Hey, it's kind of waning. It's fading. I don't see much of a future for it." And some Christian leaders recently were discussing whether or not Christian nationalism is already dead. And I have my own thoughts about that. But since you wrote a not insignificant book on the subject of Christian nationalism, I want to get your thoughts about that, and also, uh, where it could be going if it's not dead. Like, what do you think is in the offing for it?
Well, I mean, first of all, they've been saying that for 2.5 years. So,
Okay.
um,
Yeah.
and it hasn't. The other thing is,
Okay.
you have to interpret that stuff as a form of speech act,
Mm.
meaning that by they're hoping that by them saying it, it brings about what they're
Yeah. Yeah.
saying.
Yeah. I see.
And
Yeah.
so that's how I interpret a lot of these guys talking like that they actually desire to be dead, and by saying so, they
Hmm.
contribute to its death.
Do you think it's a way
Um,
possibly to disassociate oneself from it by saying, "Hey, I think this is dead. I think it's fading. I'm going to move on." Or I'm glad I never took up the label or something like that. These people, we all need to scatter. So I guess it kind of goes with what you're saying, the idea of
yeah,
speak acting. I think actually CJ Ingle mentioned that too, or maybe it was somebody else who said something similar. Anyway.
I don't know. Um, yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess people can say that to dissociate. I don't know exactly, um, but if people are going to say that Christian nationalism or the label itself is waning, I can't really say that's true or false. But what I do see on the rise are more and more people uh, being or claiming to be a part and being a part of a new Christian right. So I don't think
Okay.
that the claim itself is accurate as to the kind of the substance of the movement. Because
Hmm.
I've said for like over 2 years that, hey, if you don't want it, if you don't like the label, then don't adopt it. And some people who are on our side and agree with most of what 99% of what we say, don't have never adopted it. So take like CJ Engel.
Hmm.
But I think
Right.
what we are in the situation now is that people are devoting more energy to institution building. We're building networks,
Okay.
we're doing conferences, and we're in a way kind of honing our message to in a way to be more, I guess, more disciplined.
Okay.
And so I don't think it's not dying because the ideas themselves are still advancing. And again,
Yeah.
2 years I've said, I don't care if you take the label, I want you to adopt the ideas given these
Hmm.
arguments.
Hmm.
And it certainly is the case at this point that many people, including in reform seminaries, people
Right.
in churches who now understand the dynamics of ecclesiastical
Right.
politics, are not saying actually what they believe. So there is a significant group
Mm.
of people who are doing that because
Yeah.
they want to move up and just wait 10, 20 years and see what
Right.
happens.
We're marching
And
through your institutions, and there's nothing you can do about it.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I don't think, yeah, I think that we have made a significant impact upon the thinking in the reformed world and beyond it. People are
Hmm.
asking questions they never asked, that that were never allowed to ask. and we're engaging their minds. Like, this is the thing that you and I do, which is we don't chase the algorithm. We don't
Right.
chase after the flashy object to try to get all the attention and likes. We just try to put forward the best arguments we can for the position. And in our world, in the kind of the classical Protestant Reformed world, people are very receptive to that. That's what they want. That's what they're
Sure.
used to.
Sure.
And so
Well, we
I
treat them
think,
like adults. We treat them like
right,
rational beings. We speak to their mind and their
yeah,
reason. We don't speak behind them into their soul and try to manipulate them with gimmicks. And I think people
yeah.
appreciate that, especially younger people. They don't like being talked down to by their elders or something, by older people, or sold a bag of tricks.
I think
And
too, though, like you and I, this is why I've said that you and I complement each other so well, because the classical world and a lot of the literature I don't know. I studied a lot of the Protestant, like early modern period, and
mhm.
that's I mean, in a way, between the two of us is a sort of approaching a complete education of early modern man, I guess.
Yeah,
And so, like,
for
we're
sure.
actually presenting to people, the thinking of our spiritual, our theological heroes. And
Hmm.
there's no way like that is not going to have an impact as we move forward. So
Right. Great.
yeah,
Yeah, I
so
think
it's
also,
the death of Christian nationalism has been greatly exaggerated.
right. I thought about that. Who said that? Mark Twain or somebody? Yeah, but I thought about
Yeah.
this with the right word lurch of politics is not a church phenomenon in the Reformed world.
Hmm.
It's happening all across the Western world and perhaps beyond the Western world as well. It's happened now. It's not without its own challenges. And the left, the moderates are not just going to sit around and watch this happen. Liberalism's been the regnant ideology for quite a while now. It's not going to go quietly into the night. And no war is over yet, just because a few battles here and there have been won, perhaps. But there is a rightward movement happening, and the rightward ideas, and you can call these different names, just traditional, natural, and so on, rational, I would call it. But this is happening outside of the church, and as much as Christians, and as much as I would like to think that the church is the leader of culture and politics, maybe at one time this was the case, perhaps, but I wouldn't say it's like either or. I would say there are various factors. It's like in a football game. There's not one thing. There's many factors on the field making something happen. And so I think this is the case here with the rightward lurch. The church is caught up in a broader movement that it itself doesn't necessarily start. And there are people who are learning ideas inside or outside. So to say that, like, so let's say Christian nationalism is no longer being discussed, which is not true. It still is.
Yeah.
Uh, but even if it wasn't, you still have an entire world movement happening right now, a pivot in history, and that is much larger than any one pastor who's upset about it. He said he's gonna stop it or something like. I think the best thing you can do at this point is be studious and find answers against it if you want to be against it, but don't triumphantly stomp your foot and say, this is going to be, I'm going to kick this out or something. Like, no. And don't say this thing is dead, Christian nationalism is dead. It's not dead, in my opinion. I said this recently elsewhere, but I know, Stephen, you differ a little bit from this, which is fine. But in my opinion, Christ wants the nations. He made the nations for himself, and he wants them to bow to him. He wants kings to bow to him everywhere. This is all through the Bible. This is in the Psalms everywhere. It's Nebuchadnezzar's, this pagan king, and God wants him to bow down to him. And this is not changed in the New Testament, or the New Testament era that we live in, and it's not different. And so the Great Commission, Christ doesn't say go out and baptize individuals. He doesn't say go out and evangelize a bunch of atomistic people. He says go baptize the nations. And I know nation states are not the same thing as ethnic nations back then, but the idea that God wants entities, groups of people, of ethnic peoples, to bow down to him and worship him, it's not going away. He's not going to change his mind. And so the idea that a nation as it's constituted today should be Christian is not this far-fetched, strange thing. The word nation was chosen by the first English translators to signify the word ethnos or ethne or laos in the Testament. And not without reason. They had their reasons for that. It was the age of nationalism was starting during the time of the early translations of English. And so we have this concept in our own history, going back, of Christianity, that God wants nations to worship him, to bow down to him. And so whatever form that is conceived in, it's not going to go away because God doesn't want it to go away. So it doesn't matter, even if we fail in our generation, the idea that the nation should be Christian is still the correct idea. And by God, it
Yeah.
will happen one day.
Yeah, and one of the differences too is that many of the sort of spokesmen for the movement, I guess, they're not pastors and theologians tied to kind of a good old boy network in ecclesiastical politics, right? They're not the sort of people who are looking at the landscape of the PCA or the OPC or the SBC and thinking, for me to be relevant in this space, I need to adopt these literally liberal politics. I have to be a liberal philosophically and theologically, or philosophically. Like the people, so they're also people of different training, different background. So I'm political theory. You do classics. C.J. Engel is basically more of a modern political theory guy. What we're talking about, the way we talk about politics is much different than what most people have heard. Even if they've listened to Doug Wilson for a long time, the way we talk about things is different because we have studied. We're basically philosophers. We're basically political theorists, political philosophers. And so we approach these things from a different angle that I think are actually more substantive. They are not emotive. So we don't do the emotive. We don't do the moral pieties. We don't think simply citing a Bible verse is going to answer the question usually. And I just, from what I can tell from particularly younger people, our age and younger, they're very receptive to that, especially if they are also receptive to some of the right, broadly speaking, the new right, which is very influential among young men. And it's so I just can't see how any of this is dying. It's growing. It's growing in substance and discipline and numbers. But as anything, I think, but again, I said earlier, there has to be, and what people are doing is they are transitioning to building institutions and platforms where we can actually make a more personal, I guess, difference and build sort of like institutional credibility. Because largely we've been shut out. We've been shut out from the institutions. So yeah, I think we're good.
Okay.
All right. So I guess I'll close this out then. How's that?
All right. It's a good conversation.
All right. Well, yeah. All right. Well, everyone, thank you for listening. So please, if you are interested in this sort of commentary and or you want to support us, which would be great, you can go to thelonebulwark.supercast.com, thelonebulwark.supercast.com, and you can sign up for that. Again, there's Politica Show. We've got my Scholars series. I'm finishing up Logic 2 in a couple of weeks, and then I'll be moving on to Material Logic and other things. And we have The Lone Bulwark, my show, and it's as well. Did I miss anything, Thomas? I think I got it.
Yeah, The Lone Bulwark, by the way, you get it there earlier than you get it on YouTube.
Yeah, right.
I don't know how many days earlier, but you get it fresh and you get it no ads. And you also get there's different tiers. The higher up you go, the more content you get from us. And at some point you get us. So we have things like direct Zoom calls once a month. We put out some show note. We put out all our show notes at a certain level for you to look into all the details that we leave out. I mean, we go through a lot of information when we put out these shows. So you can get all that there at different tiers at thelonebulwark.supercast.com.
All right. Well, you guys, thank you for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.
Appreciate you guys. Bye.